Thank you very much for that massive build up. Can you see the presentation there?
Yes, you can see it.
You can see it, right? So it's taking up the full screen. Yep.
Yes, full
Brilliant.
screen.
Okay, right. Thanks very much. That was the big build up. Now comes the fall. No, I'm really kidding. So thanks very much for that. You've given me a really tough task, citizenship education and schools, 20 minutes. I think I've been working in this field. I worked out for 27 years. So that's about less than a minute for each of the years that I've been involved. So these will be my own experience and my own views, and hopefully you'll find them interesting. I'm not sure how many of you are experts in education or citizenship education, but hopefully you pick up something that might be of value to you. And thanks very much for inviting me to do this. I think it's fantastic that you've got this project and can add to the research base, because we desperately need this. So I've called it Citizenship Education and Schools. What, why, how well. As you said, you introduced me much more eloquently than that slide does. So thank you very much for that. And I want to really try very quickly a few minutes on each to leave time for questions at the end or conversation, whatever is easier. 4 questions. We could spend a whole seminar or series on each of these. So what is citizenship education? Why is citizenship education important in schools? And we're not talking just about the UK here, we're talking about Europe and internationally. How is citizenship education best approached in schools? And the final one, always the tricky one, what are some of the key challenges for citizenship education, which you're going to come across and hopefully add to in your project? So let's crack on with the first one. What is citizenship education? It's hard enough to say the term citizenship without adding the word education. Lots of definitions around. I've just chosen this one because it's quite useful. That was the Declaration of EU Ministers back in 2015. The primary purpose of education is to develop all these things and help people become active, responsible, open-minded members of society. I mean, fundamentally, the thing with citizenship is it's a legal status, although not everyone's born a citizen. There are also a set of rights and responsibilities that go with it: voting, participation, all those kind of things. And crucially, it's an educational activity, because you have to learn how to be an active, responsible, open-minded citizen at whatever level, how you engage with the different communities that you are part of. For young people, that would be partly schools as well. So it's important that you are educated to be a citizen, put simply. And there are lots of definitions around, and that's just one of them. For me, I always think it's fundamentally about helping young people understand about society, how it's organized, and crucially where power lies, because that's the crucial thing. There's a lot of horizontal participation takes place. You participate in things, but I think young people really learn about citizenship education where they're involved in vertical participation. And that basically means where they take on people in power. They try and change things. Could be in their school, could be in their classroom, could be in their local community, could be in their society. And put down blandly like this, it sounds very boring about politics, law, human rights, cultures, religions. But why it's important is it helps young people understand the world around them. And that's fundamentally what it's about, because young people are sponges. They pick up a lot of information about the world, but they really don't have lots of opportunities to talk about it. And therefore, it's vital from an early age, and these are primary school pupils in England, so they're probably aged 8 to 11, taking part in community activities and developing a voice. These young people wanted a change to a bridge near their school. They wanted it cleaned up, drug paraphernalia removed, lights put on it so it was safe to get to school. And they lobbied their local MP, their teachers, and they took a petition to Parliament. And it's also about young people understanding about choices and behaviours. These are 2 famous characters, but we're all involved in society, and we have choices about how we act as individuals, and critically now how we come together as different groups of people collectively to bring about change. So that's why citizenship education is so important. And why is it important in schools? Basically, because if something is really important in society, you will find that schools cover it. So schools basically are an anchor for developing citizenship, particularly with young people, and then the effects ripple out. This is a quote from someone who I work closely with in putting citizenship into the national curriculum in England, Professor Sir Bernard Crick. When citizenship was launched in England back in 1999, went in the curriculum in 2002, he basically saw it as it's a subject, but more than a subject. If taught well, its skills and values enhance democratic life for all of us, beginning in school and radiating out into parents, into communities, and into society. And one of the reasons why it's so important that citizenship education is covered in schools is because much of the school curriculum is still stuck in the 20th century. Some people might argue it's stuck in the 19th century. It teaches about past knowledge, past things, things that have happened in the past. And critically, we're in a period of time you just have to pick up your iPhone, look at social media. The rapid pace of change in society is absolutely incredible. And our new challenge, and this is Kerry Kennedy, an Australian academic, is how we prepare young people for democracy in contexts that are quite different from those that we've known in the past. And that's a really big challenge because we need to help young people address current issues. It could be things like migration, movement of peoples, changing identity or identities, new technologies, social media, AI, manipulation of data, climate change. Who knows what the big issues are going to be? I mean, we wouldn't have suspected COVID 3 or 4 years ago. Who knows what the new issues are going to be? But I think fundamentally now we really need to help young people handle controversy with confidence. That's the really big thing in citizenship, rather than being scared, rather than feeling that society is being done to you by big organizations or big government or whatever. We have to recognize that we live in an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And we need to give young people the knowledge, understanding, skills, attitudes, and values, what you might call civic competencies, to actually deal with that. And another reason why it's important, and this is some research from political scientists, I'm sure there's been some newer research done, but critically for me, citizenship education is about helping young people develop not just political interest in its broadest sense, but political efficacy. Efficacy is really important, that sense that you can make a difference, and you can make a difference individually, or you can make a difference working with others. And political scientists have done lots of research, and what they've basically found is that political interest develops over time. And we're talking here, as you can see from this graph, from the age of 12 all the way up to 29. And what it fundamentally shows is basically by the time you've reached 18, 19, your sense of political interest has fully developed. It's kind of leveled off. So this critical period between 12 and 17 is when you are really soaking up lots of things that are going on in the world. And I would argue you may well find that this goes down to primary level now, that young people are really interested in stuff. They're soaking up lots of information about what's going on in the world. They have lots of questions about it. And citizenship education gives them an opportunity in the curriculum in schools to raise that with their teachers, to talk about things, to ask questions, and to really develop that political interest. And why that's important, as I said, by age 20, it's between the ages of 13 and 15 and possibly lower now, that young people are really soaking up that political interest when they're actually there in schools. And if there isn't opportunity for young people to talk about that, it's critical that they actually do, because political interest or political efficacy can develop in two directions. It can increase, but crucially, it can also decrease. Young people can get turned off from thinking they can become active, informed citizens and just become standby citizens, drop out of society. And we saw perhaps the effects of standby citizens in things like the Brexit vote, where people thought, no, we're going to get through, it's going to be fine. And I've spoken to lots of people who said to me, well, I just wish I'd voted. And that makes a crucial difference. So we need to think about the kind of interventions that take place, not just in schools, but certainly with teachers, but also with parents, with others in society for young people, certainly at the start, in the early years of secondary, but possibly also in primary. So moving on to the third question, realize I've only got 20 minutes. How is citizenship education best approached? Well, there's been loads of studies looking at this, but to try and sum it up, let's get all these up first. Hope you can see them all. It's fairly standard practice now in citizenship education that we talk about the 3 C's, or the 3 contexts or dimensions of citizenship. If we're talking about it in schools, it needs to be in the curriculum. And there are lots of studies by Eurydice, longitudinal study that I did, that basically show that schools approach it in different ways. You can get discrete citizenship lessons. It can be cross-curricular through lots of different subjects. You can have single drop-down days, you can have tutorials, and you can have extracurricular. Citizenship generally works best where it's discrete. There is some time for it in the curriculum, but it shouldn't just happen in the curriculum. It's also important it takes part in school culture, or it's part of school culture. So it's how the school acts. It acts to support citizenship. Young people are involved in decision making, whether that's formally through school councils. They're given positions of responsibility. They might even be given funds to improve the school. They're consulted on things, and their voices are taken seriously because there's a lot of consultation of young people, but often nothing is done with the consultation results, and young people get really pissed off with that. They can suss it out. The longitudinal study suggested that by age 14, the school is the main community for young people. It's where they spend most of their time. It's where they got all their mates. So they are really invested in it, and therefore they can make differences. But it's also important to involve the wider community. This can be the communities around the school, but also new technology now allows you to link to schools and other places across the world. So you can do visits to different places. You can run community campaigns. You can bring experts in, etc. So it's important, if citizenship is to work really well in schools, it's in the curriculum, it's supported by the school culture, and there are links to wider communities around the school. So those 3 dimensions are really important. And it's also important that it's taught, there's clearly a knowledge element to it, but it's taught in a way that's active. It's relevant. It tackles real life issues. You get opportunities to work with others. You discuss and debate. You think for yourself, and you have a say. Might only be a small say, but you have a say. You try and change things. You're not always going to be successful, but it's looking at the lessons you gain from trying to be participative, which is really important. And what works best? The longitudinal study, it's a dated study now, but other studies have basically shown, and what's quite interesting here is when I first got involved in citizenship about 27 years ago, I ran an international seminar for QCA, and I remember one of the Canadian delegates came up to me and said, well, David, we know what works in citizenship education. We just need the leaders to put it into action. And I have to agree with him, having been involved for so long. We know what works. We just need it put in action in much more places. So what you need is supportive senior leadership within a school, and a school ethos and culture which really supports it. Crucially, you need trained specialist citizenship coordinators who can lead the citizenship curriculum and train others. You need a clear understanding of what citizenship is, and there's a lot of confusion with personal social health education in England or fundamental British values. A lot of people say it's got no real knowledge, you just kind of experience it. So we need to be really clear about what it is, and it's got its own curriculum with its knowledge and understanding and skills and values and attitudes set out. It needs to have status, and that's absolutely critical as well as a subject, and it needs time and resources. That's curriculum time and money to go with it. Kids will soon, and parents will soon sniff it out if it's just one lesson a week taught by a load of people who don't really know what they're doing using worksheets. You need discrete, identifiable, well-planned citizenship, both in and beyond the curriculum. You need it to be properly assessed. So there's some hard outcomes, and there are, in England at least, there are examinations that you can take. And most critically, pupils, the longitudinal study suggested that pupils get the best outcomes where they get regular citizenship teaching and have an opportunity to develop and reinforce citizenship competencies. Now, you could argue that could be a list for any subject. And therefore, citizenship, at least in England, has often been playing catch up because the other curriculum subjects have been in the curriculum for a lot longer, and they have networks and all sorts of other things. So it's been a tough road in England for the last 20 years. But what we found in the longitudinal study, when we asked teachers and head teachers, by the end of the 10 years of the longitudinal study, many teachers and school teachers with citizenship just coming into the curriculum in 2002, certainly by 2008 and 9, had identified benefits of citizenship education in their schools, both in the school and critically out of the school. They thought it made students more positive in terms of their behaviour, more willing to participate in schools. It improved the relationship with the community. It improved students' confidence, which is absolutely critical. Students engaged with local issues. They talked about how they might vote in the future and how they might participate in the community in the future, and it increased consultation with students. So it had some real concrete outcomes. But critically, what are some of the main challenges for citizenship education? And these apply not just in England, but in many other countries. One of the main challenges is still big debate over what citizenship education is. What are its ultimate aims? And put simply, this was some research that was done in the US about 10 years ago, but it suggested there are three types of citizenship education. There's a kind of conformist. You want your citizens to pay their taxes, tidy the streets, not protest, those kind of things. It's about responsibility. And then there's the reformist one, active participation, maximizing citizens' involvement in society. And then you could argue the best sort is the transformative. You enable young people to call into question things that are happening in society and have the capacity to bring about real change. And I would argue in the 1990s and 2000s, when we had centre-left governments in England and across Europe, we were aiming more at a reformist citizenship education, edging towards a transformist. With the changes of government that took place in from 2010 onwards, as well as with the economic recession, we've had much more of a move towards a conformist citizenship education. And that's a bit of a shame because I see that as a backward step. So one of the challenges is working out what your aims of citizenship education are. Another key challenge is we need more trained citizenship teachers. Certainly in England, we haven't even got one citizenship education teacher in every school. There are quite a few schools that do no citizenship education and get away with it. We've got some amazing beacons of practice, and organisations like the Association for Citizenship Teaching and Young Citizens do great work in bringing those involved in teaching citizenship together. And therefore, we've grown massively now because people are teaching it every day. Much more pedagogical expertise, much more communities of practice, and through simple things like sharing of practice. This is the latest edition of Teaching Citizenship, which has just come out last week. I've co-edited it with a deputy head in a school up in Leeds, and we tried to pull together how people are planning citizenship as experts, non-specialists, through different subjects, across MATs now, these multi-academy trusts where we've got citizenship coordinators now, long-term planning, medium-term planning, short-term planning. We couldn't have done that 15 years ago. We wouldn't have had the experts to actually do that. So it's encouraging teachers to talk about their practice and to share it with others. That's just one of the examples. We also need more materials. These are some materials I've developed with the Council of Europe, which are actually free. And we also need more countries to really take citizenship seriously. This is Norway, following that tragic event with Anders Breivik, where he murdered all those young people on that island of Utøya. The Norwegian government have set it up as an educational centre now, in partnership with the European Wergeland Centre in Oslo. Every young person in Norwegian schools now goes to do some training on Utøya, to learn about radicalization, to learn about how society works, to learn about citizenship, participation, and coming together. So there's an absolute tribute there. And if you're wondering what that funny cone is, I did some training on Utøya, which is one of the hardest things I've ever done. And that's one of the cones that I picked up, which I actually have on my windowsill here now, because it reminds me of why citizenship education is so important. And I just want to finish with a couple of slides, or 2 or 3 slides. Another really critical thing for citizenship education in schools is closing the gap between policy, educational practice, and research. And this is about how far citizenship education is a priority and how far you're able to close the implementation gap between policy being developed, practice taking place in schools, and then people doing research or evaluation to find out what's actually going on. I would argue in the 1990s, as I already mentioned, in the 2000s, because we had centre-left governments across Europe, citizenship education was much more of a priority. It was seen as a way of making societies more cohesive, sharing, dealing with issues. There was much more policy support, there was much more educational practice, and there was much more research and evaluation to find out what was actually going on and try and bring improvements. Unfortunately, from 2010 onwards, across much of Europe and the rest of the world, we've had a move towards centre-right governments. We've also had the economic recession, which still continues now. And what seems to have happened over the years is that there's a danger that citizenship education is seen as a luxury, something to be promoted in times of wealth, peace, prosperity, that when times get hard, there's a narrowing of the curriculum. It talks about key skills, subjects like maths, literacy, science, technology, and citizenship education becomes a kind of bolt-on, an addition. It's used to deal with certain issues. If there's a terrorist attack, we need to look at fundamental values, those kind of things. That broad-based sense of citizenship tends to be pushed out the window. So it's seen as a more narrow, limited view of it. Now, maybe we're going to get some change with a general election in the UK next year, a new government coming in, and the potential for new ideas. And one of the things on the table is the potential to bring in voting at age 16, which would massively change views about citizenship education in schools. And then the other thing we need to do is see how we can close the implementation gap. There's always a gap between the policy, the practice, and critically, we need much more research. The evidence base now is very dated, very limited. It's great you're going to add to it, but we need much, much more. And we need organizations and governments to put much more money into research. Because at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves, if we're looking at what kind of education system we need, and I would argue that citizenship education needs to be center stage, but I would say that comes down to the fundamental question that a famous Chilean writer raised, is what kind of education system do we need? Well, what kind of society do we want to create? And there are some massive challenges out there for our young people. And I think we want to create a kind of society where they feel that they can tackle them and address them positively, working in collaboration with others. Now, as Bernard Crick said, the devil is always in the detail. But I'll just end with a quote by Kerry Kennedy, because I think our big challenge now is we can't just look at citizenship education within individual countries. The kind of issues that we're dealing with in society will need are affecting us globally. Just look at what's happening with climate change across Europe in the last couple of weeks, and what's actually going on there. And we're going to need global responses. And therefore, it's critical that our young people develop those civic competencies through their schools, in collaboration with their parents or guardians, working with others to ensure that they feel like they can actually make a difference, and they can support democracy. Because democracy, it might not be the best system in the world, but it's the best one we have for now. And our real challenge is to stop the threats that come to it. the next one will be AI, but who knows the ones after that. So we need not just to promote democracy, but we need to encourage young people to actually defend it, because of all the threats that are actually out there. So I'll finish on that point. Hopefully I've cut roughly to my 20 minutes, but I'm happy to take any questions, observations, or whatever that come from it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. That was fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot to think about from that. I have some notes that I've written down and I've also have some questions that I've sort of jotted down. But I first want to open the floor to anyone else who may have any questions or comments or points of elaboration or clarification. Oh, sorry, before that, sorry, Brian, I'm going to shut off the recording just so we can feel like we can speak freely. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay.